I am angry at my husband because he decided to choose his late wife over me. My husband was married once before me. She was his high school sweetheart. They started dating their junior year, survived long distance during college, and got married when they were both 23, very shortly after graduating college. She passed away unexpectedly at age 26 from an aneurysm, and it obviously devastated him, especially because they were so young. They never had children. He contemplated never remarrying because he was so heartbroken, but we ended up meeting about 4 years after her passing. We got married when I was 31, and he was 34. Now we have 2 beautiful children together. For the most part, our life has been a happy one, filled with the usual ups and downs of marriage and parenting. But last night, something happened that shook me to my core. We were at a friend's potluck gathering. Everything was going well, good food, good company, lots of laughter. One of our friends, who is newly divorced, started a conversation about relationships. It was a natural segue into stories about past relationships. People started sharing nostalgic tales of high school crushes, college sweethearts, and even some regrettable flings. It was all lighthearted until it wasn't. When it was my turn, I admitted I never thought I would get married because my luck with men had always been terrible until I met my husband. I said I felt very lucky to have found him. Everyone nodded and smiled, and it felt like one of those warm, affirming moments. But then my husband spoke up. He started talking about his first wife. Everyone in the room knows he was married before me and that she passed away. He's mentioned her a handful of times in the past, always in a way that's thoughtful and respectful. I've always tried to be understanding, knowing that part of loving him means understanding he'll always have a place in his heart for her. But this time, his words hit differently. After reminiscing for a moment, he said, "If she walked through that front door right now, it'd pick up where we left off." It felt like someone put my heart in a blender and punched me in the gut at the same time. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Someone coughed awkwardly, and another person quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. I tried to laugh it off to avoid making a scene, but I'm sure my discomfort was obvious to everyone there. As the evening wound down, I felt numb. On the drive home, I didn't say a word. My husband asked if I was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Once we got home, I finally told him, "What you said really hurt me. I don't want to talk about it right now because I am afraid I'll say something I can't take back. Let's talk in the morning." He tried to apologize, but I couldn't listen. I ended up sleeping on the couch because he kept trying to get me to talk, and I just needed space. Morning has come, and I barely slept. He's still in bed, and I'm sitting here with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing, wondering what to say. The truth is, I don't even know how to begin. On one hand, I understand that grief is complicated and doesn't follow a timeline. On the other hand, his comment made me question everything about our relationship. Does he really love me? Or am I just a consolation prize? If he'd choose her in a heartbeat, then why did he marry me? Why build a life with me? Why bring children into the world with me? I know it's not fair to compare myself to her. She's not here, and she never chose to leave. In his eyes, she'll always be frozen in time, young, beautiful, perfect. I, on the other hand, am here, flawed, growing older every day. I've made peace with the fact that he'll always love her, but last night's comment crossed a line I didn't even realize existed until now. I've replayed the moment over and over in my head, wondering if I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just his grief talking. Maybe it's a testament to how deeply he loved her. But then I think about how those words felt, like a dagger to the heart. And I can't ignore the fact that I'm hurt. What am I supposed to say to him? How do I explain that while I understand his grief, his comment made me feel invisible, like I'm just filling a void? How do I move forward from this without it festering in the back of my mind, poisoning our relationship? Part of me wants to lash out, to tell him how cruel his words were, and demand to know why he said them. Another part of me wants to just let it go, to sweep it under the rug for the sake of peace. But I know that's not sustainable. If I don't address this, it will eat away at me. I'm terrified of what his response might be. What if he confirms my worst fears? What if he admits that he does love her more than me? That if given the chance, he'd choose her over me? I'm not sure my heart could survive hearing those words. For now, I'm sitting here, waiting for him to wake up, trying to find the courage to have a conversation I'm not sure I'm ready for. All I know is that something has shifted, and I don't know how to shift it back. The life we've built together feels suddenly fragile, like a house of cards that could collapse with the slightest breeze, and am not sure how to rebuild it if it does. The morning unfolded with an unsettling quiet, the kind of quiet that carries weight, pressing on every corner of the house. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft chirp of birds outside, but it all felt distant, muted against the storm in my mind. My coffee had gone cold in my hands, untouched for the past hour as I sat on the couch, rehearsing conversations that I wasn't sure I could have. Eventually, I heard the creak of the bedroom door opening, followed by the shuffle of my husband's footsteps. My heart sank into my stomach. I wasn't ready, but there was no way to avoid it now. He appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, a cautious look in his eyes. For a brief moment, I thought he might try to brush past last night, pretend it didn't happen, but the concern etched into his face told me he wouldn't. "Good morning," he said hesitantly, his voice soft, testing the waters. I nodded but didn't say anything. My hands tightened around the mug in my lap, and I stared down at it, focusing on the faint swirl of cream in the cold coffee. He stepped closer and sat down on the armchair opposite me, his presence filling the room with unspoken tension. "I am sorry about last night," he began. "I've been thinking about it all morning, and I know what I said hurt you." I looked up at him then, searching his face for sincerity. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. Good, I thought bitterly. At least I wasn't the only one losing sleep over this. "Why did you say it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed deeply and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't know. It just came out. We were talking about past relationships, and I guess I got caught up in the moment. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did," I said, my voice steady now, though my hands were trembling. "Do you realize what it sounded like? What it felt like to hear you say that?" "I do," he said quickly. "I've been replaying it in my head, and I know how wrong it sounded. I didn't mean it the way it came out." "Then how did you mean it?" I pressed. "Because it felt like you were saying you'd rather be with her. Like if she were still here, I wouldn't even exist to you." He flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. "I've always known she was a part of your life. I've accepted that. But last night, you made me feel like I'm just a placeholder, like I'm not enough." "You are enough," he said firmly, his voice filled with urgency. "You're more than enough. I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. I love you. I love the life we've built together. I don't want you to doubt that." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I quickly wiped them away, frustrated with myself for crying. "Then why would you say something like that? Why would you even think it?" He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe it's guilt. Guilt for moving on. Guilt for being happy again. Sometimes I feel like if I let go of her completely, I'm betraying her memory. But I know that's not fair to you, or to me." I stared at him, trying to process his words. Guilt. It made sense in a way, but it didn't make the hurt any less sharp. "Do you regret marrying me?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. "No, absolutely not," he said, his voice steady and sure. "You're my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children. I don't regret a single moment of our life together. I don't know how to reconcile the past with the present sometimes. And last night, I failed at that." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words settling between us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that his love for me was real and whole, not overshadowed by the ghost of a love that came before. "I don't know what to do with this," I admitted finally. "I don't know how to move forward from here." "Neither do I," he said quietly, "but I want to figure it out, together." His words hung in the air, a tentative offering. I nodded slowly, though the knot in my chest didn't loosen. "I need time," I said. "Time to process this. Time to figure out what I need from you. Because right now, I feel like I'm drowning in questions." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his voice was comforting, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt. I stood up, needing to put some physical distance between us. "I'm going for a walk," I said. "I need some air." "Okay," he said, his eyes following me as I grabbed my coat and slipped on my shoes. "I'll be here when you get back." As I stepped outside, the crisp morning air hit my face, a welcome relief from the heaviness inside the house. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. I thought about everything I'd said, about the pain in his eyes and the regret in his voice. I thought about the life we'd built together, the love we'd shared, and the shadow of a past that still lingered between us. And I wondered if love was enough to bridge the gap. The walk did little to clear my mind. The rhythmic crunch of my boots against the gravel and the crisp air biting at my cheeks weren't enough to drown out the chaos in my head. My thoughts circled back to his words again and again, like a relentless tide eroding the fragile shoreline of my composure. I found myself wandering into the park, a place we'd often brought the kids. The empty swings swayed gently in the breeze, their creaking chains the only sound breaking the silence. I sat down on a weathered bench near the edge of the playground, my hands stuffed deep into my coat pockets, and stared at the world in front of me, so still, so indifferent to the storm inside me. I thought about the day we met, how Head made me laugh with a self-deprecating joke about spilling coffee on his tie at work, how his smile had a way of lighting up a room, of making me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. And I thought about all the little moments since then, the countless ways Head shown me love and care. Those memories felt like a lifeline, tethering me to something real, something worth fighting for. But they also felt overshadowed now, like they existed in the shadow of a love I could never compete with. I'd always known she was a part of his past, but last night made it painfully clear that she was still very much a part of his present. And that left me questioning where I truly stood in his life. A movement in the distance caught my eye, and I turned to see an elderly couple walking hand in hand along the path. Their pace was slow, their steps unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. They stopped occasionally to point at something or exchange a quiet word, their smiles soft and full of a lifetime of shared experiences. I watched them for a long moment, envy and hope twisting together in my chest. Would that ever be us? Could we ever grow old together, hand in hand, with no shadows between us? Eventually, the chill became too much, and I made my way back home. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, the warm air a sharp contrast to the cold it just left. I slipped off my coat and boots, setting them aside, and hesitated in the hallway. I could hear the faint sound of the TV from the living room and knew he was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and walked in. He was sitting on the couch, his posture tense, but his face softened when he saw me. He muted the TV and turned to face me fully, his eyes searching mine. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I replied, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Do you want to sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the spot next to him. I hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and sitting down, leaving a small gap between us. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "How was your walk?" he asked, his tone tentative. "It was fine," I said, my voice flat. "It gave me some time to think." "And?" he prompted gently. I turned to face him then, meeting his eyes. "And I still don't know how to feel about what you said. I'm trying to understand, but it's hard. It's really hard." He nodded, his expression somber. "I know, and I don't expect you to have all the answers right now. I want you to know that I'm here and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. I'm not sure it's something you can fix," I said quietly. "This isn't about an apology or making amends. It's about us. It's about whether we can move forward from this, whether we can build a life that isn't overshadowed by your past." He looked down at his hands, his brow furrowed. "I've been thinking about that too," he admitted, "about how much space I've allowed her memory to take up in my life, and in ours. Maybe I haven't been as fair to you as I should have been." I blinked, caught off guard by his admission. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've always thought of her as this untouchable part of my past, something sacred that I couldn't let go of. But in holding on to her so tightly, maybe I've been holding you at arm's length without even realizing it." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Finally, I spoke. "Do you think you're ready to let go?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "I don't know if letting go is the right word," he said slowly, "but I think I'm ready to make room. Room for you, for us, for the life we've built together. Because that life is worth everything to me, and so are you." My heart clenched at his words, a small flicker of hope igniting in the darkness. But I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. Actions would have to follow. And even then, it would take time for the wounds to heal, for trust to be rebuilt. "I want to believe you," I said finally, "but it's going to take more than words. It's going to take time and effort from both of us." "I understand," he said, "and am willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, I love our family, and I don't want to lose that." I nodded slowly, my emotions still a tangled mess. "Neither do I, but we need to be honest with each other about everything. No more unspoken feelings or buried guilt. If we're going to move forward, we have to do it together." "Together," he repeated, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. For the first time since last night, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The following weeks were a slow and painful process of rediscovery. Conversations that once felt natural now came with a heaviness, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. But we talked. For the first time in a long while, we truly talked. Not just about what had happened that night, but about everything that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. It wasn't easy. There were tears, arguments, moments of silence that stretched so long they felt like chasms. But in those silences, we found space to think, to process, to allow our hearts to catch up with our minds. I began to see the depth of his grief in ways I hadn't before, and he, in turn, began to understand the impact of his words, not just that night, but throughout our marriage. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, he brought out a box I'd only seen once before. It was small, worn at the edges, and tied with a faded blue ribbon. He placed it on the table between us and sat down, his hands trembling slightly. "This was hers," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've kept it all these years, but I think it's time for me to go through it. And I want you to be here with me." I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for this, but I could see how much it meant to him, how important it was for him to take this step. So I nodded and reached out, placing my hand over his. Together, we untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside were fragments of a life it'd never been part of but had always known existed. Photos of the two of them, smiling and carefree. Letters she'd written him during their time apart in college. A dried corsage from what I assumed was a high school dance. It was both heartbreaking and beautiful to witness, this tangible evidence of a love that had once been so vibrant. As we went through the box, he shared stories I'd never heard before. Some made me laugh, others brought tears to my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like his partner, someone he trusted enough to share this deeply personal part of himself with. When we reached the bottom of the box, he took a deep breath and looked at me. "I think I've been holding on to this because I was afraid that letting it go meant letting go of her, that it meant forgetting her. But now I see that it's not about forgetting. It's about making room for what's here, for what's now." Tears streamed down my face as I listened to his words. "You don't have to let go of her memory," I said softly. "She'll always be a part of you, but I need to know that there's room in your heart for me too. For us." He reached across the table and took my hands in his. "There is. There always has been. I just didn't know how to show it before, but I'm going to try. I promise I'll try." From that night on, things began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but the changes were there. He started being more present, more intentional about the time we spent together. He stopped retreating into himself when things got hard and started opening up instead. And I, in turn, worked on letting go of the resentment and insecurity that had built up over the years. We began to rebuild our relationship, brick by brick. We made time for date nights, even if it was just sitting on the couch after the kids were asleep, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching a movie. We started having honest conversations about our feelings, even when they were messy or uncomfortable. And slowly but surely, the gap between us began to close. One day, while cleaning out the attic, I found an old photo album from the early years of our relationship. As I flipped through the pages, I was struck by how happy we looked, how full of hope and love. I realized that while the past was a part of our story, it didn't define us. What defined us were the choices we made every day to love and support each other, to be present for our family, to keep building a life together. That night, I showed him the album. We sat on the floor of the living room, flipping through the pages and reminiscing. At one point, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a tenderness that took my breath away. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said, "for not giving up on us." I smiled through my tears. "Thank you for fighting for us," I replied, "for choosing us." In the end, our story wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it didn't exist. It was about finding a way to honor it while also making space for the present and the future. It was about learning that love isn't a finite resource, that it can grow and expand and adapt. And most importantly, it was about realizing that while the road might not always be easy, it's worth walking together. As we sat there, surrounded by the memories we'd created and the dreams we still held, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The shadows that had once loomed so large seemed smaller now, less threatening. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly hopeful about the path ahead. Because in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about choosing each other day after day, no matter what. And that was a choice we were both finally ready to make.